Now we'll go into detail about how to use the Threatened Species Advisor. There are 3 basic processes involved in using this tool. Number 1, identifying relevant threatened species for your area. Number 2, obtaining a recommendation from the advisor. And number 3, applying that recommendation. Once we know where we want to carry out forest practices and what type of operation we are planning, we are ready to start identifying which threatened species are relevant to the operation. Step 1 is to access an appropriate database to identify which threatened species are likely to be present in our proposed planning area. We recommend the use of our online biodiversity values database, also known as the BVD. The BVD provides information on threatened species' known localities, predicted ranges, and the habitat in which the species may occur. The BVD can be accessed through the biodiversity planning page on our website. For more information on how to use the BVD, click the question mark button here to access the user manual. You can also use other online databases like the Natural Values Atlas. A BVD report will provide you with a list of the known sites of threatened species in the area, as well as a list of the species whose predicted ranges overlap with your planning area. You'll need to examine the habitat descriptions for each of these. The next step is a field assessment to see if what's in the planning area matches the descriptions provided in the BVD report. If the BVD report says a threatened species has been recorded in the coop, we need to check that site. Also, if the BVD report gives a potential habitat description for a species of wet forest or riparian areas or trees with hollows, we need to check and see if the coop contains that habitat. A field assessment is a really important step to determine the presence, extent and suitability of habitat, confirm sites and to identify any potential management issues. A planning area may support several threatened species and it's your responsibility to ensure that the most up-to-date information is used in planning. When we have the database report and we have done a field survey to record what habitat is present in the planning area, we will be able to use the advisor.
The advisor is accessed via the FPA's website and can be found by navigating to the planning page here and then clicking on biodiversity. This page links all the biodiversity planning tools and supporting documents. The advisor can be accessed by clicking here. The advisor is divided into 2 sections, one for threatened fauna and one for threatened flora. You can navigate to either by clicking the flora or fauna here under the question, "What are you seeking management advice on?" We click Continue to progress. On this screen, read the text on the caveats and user obligations and click on Continue if agreeing to the terms of use. It's important that these terms are read and the step is completed. On this screen, select the operation type most applicable to the situation. There are 3 options to choose from, which include forestry operations. This is for all standard forestry activities such as native forest silviculture, construction of roads and quarries for the purposes of forest practices, management of existing plantations, or establishment of new plantations. This option will take us to the next step of the advisor. The next option is activities not classified as a forestry operation. This option includes things like the clearing of native forest to convert it to pasture and/or clearance and conversion of threatened native vegetation types. This option will take us straight to a recommendation, which is always to contact the FPA for case-by-case advice. The final option is activities on islands, excluding Bruny Island. Choose this for any proposals, whether standard forestry operation or some form of land clearing, on islands such as King Island, Flinders Island and others, but not Bruny Island. Like the previous option, this will take you straight to a recommendation, which is always to contact the FPA for case-by-case advice. When we have made a selection, we click Continue. For this example, we'll select Forestry Operation. On the next screen, we enter our name and the coop or specific operation identifier. This should be detailed enough to allow both yourself and auditors to be able to track who used the advisor and what coop or operation or FPP it was used for. We then click Continue when these details have been completed. We then land on this species selection screen, which includes lists of all of the threatened flora or fauna species, depending on which tool is selected. We select the species for which we need to obtain a recommendation and click Continue. We can scroll down the list by using the scroll bar on the right-hand side, or input the species name to shortlist the options. We can only select one species at a time. We will need to return to this screen for each species that may be affected by the proposed forestry operation. Now we've seen how to select a species, we'll run through a couple of examples.
Let's start by taking a look at threatened plants through an example. Our scenario is that we have a planned clearfall burn and sow operation in wet eucalyptus obliqua forest near Penguin in northern Tasmania. Looking at the BBD report for the area, we can see that there are some records of threatened flora within 2 kilometres of the planning area centroid. These are the bright green triangles. Starting at the top of the list, we have Blechnum cartilagineum, commonly known as the gristle fern. So we will use this species to look at how the advisor works. Looking closer at these records, we can see that there are about 10 records of gristle fern right inside our planning area. We are therefore highly likely to have an impact on this species. It also means that there may be more of them around if we have suitable habitat within our planning area. As discussed earlier in the course, one of the key steps in the planning process is to undertake a field assessment of the planning area, which will include checking known sites to see if the gristle fern is still there, and looking in suitable habitat to see if there are more sites than the ones on the database. We can use the habitat description and survey guidelines from the BBD report to determine the best areas and time of year to search for the fern. You can see here that this species favours sheltered sites along creeklines in northern and eastern Tasmania and is found in sites within both dry sclerophyll and wet sclerophyll forest. So we'll focus our searches along the sheltered creek inside our planning area. The survey guidelines here say that we can search at any time of the year. We checked the known sites and confirmed that this fern is still present and checked suitable habitat in our planning area and found one additional locality. Now we are ready to run the advisor to determine the relevant management advice. Jumping back into the advisor as shown previously, we select flora, followed through the steps of agreeing to the terms of use, selecting forestry activity as that is the operation type in this example, and filling in our user details. Now we have reached the list of species. Threatened plant species are listed by scientific name only. We can scroll to the species alphabetically on the page or can navigate using the search bar. If I type in Blechnum, there are 3 species in this genus that are threatened in Tasmania. For our example, I select the species relevant to our operation and click Continue at the top or bottom of the page. We have now come to our first question or decision. Do you have a known site for this species? In the advisor, a known site is when a database record or your own field observation record falls immediately adjacent to or within the boundary of the operational area. We can answer yes to this question as we had multiple records of the species in our operational area in the BVD report, which we confirmed were present during our field assessment. Then click Continue. We then come to the question, what is the planned operation type? As mentioned earlier, the operation type is a clearfall burn and sow operation in wet eucalyptus forest. Therefore, we select native forest silviculture as our planned operation type. Then click Continue. This is where we get to our recommendation. The top line here is the name of the recommendation. The group number refers to the management group for the plant species. With just under 500 flora species to take into consideration when developing the advisor, it was impractical to create and manage individual decision pathways and recommendations for every species. Therefore, species had to be grouped. Each species has been placed in one group depending on factors such as distribution, ecological function, and risk of forestry-related disturbance. Blechnum cartilagineum is in management group 2, which has the species that have demonstrated or are expected to have some level of tolerance to disturbances related to timber harvesting and regeneration, but have 1 or 2 aspects of the distribution, ecological requirements, or life history that require additional management consideration. Next is the management objective. For this species, the management objective is to implement actions that will maintain the species across its range, with particular emphasis on avoiding high impact disturbances to known sites. This objective reflects the group the species is in. Continuing down the recommendation for Blechnum cartilagineum, there are a list of recommended actions that you must do to effectively manage this species. The advice asks the user to map the extent of the species within the FPP planning area, and once these sites are mapped, the harvest boundaries for the operation can be tweaked to retain the local population, including both the population occurring within and adjacent to the FPP area. The recommendations also advise that landings and sneak tracks are located in a way that avoids or minimises disturbance to dense patches and individual plants. Once again, mapping the local population is key to being able to do this. Lastly, the advice asks that if more than 10% of the local population is lost or removed from the planning area, to contact the FPA for more advice. These are the recommendations that will be applied in the Forest Practices Plan, but more on that later. The section below is a caveat for the recommendation found on all recommendations in the advisor. And finally, right at the bottom here are your automatically generated user details, including name, location, the time you access the advisor, and what version it is. These are an important record of the currency of the recommendation you have chosen. These details can be checked in a compliance audit to ensure that you selected the correct recommendation at that point in time, even if that recommendation has changed since the time when you planned your operation.
Now that we've looked at an example of a threatened plant, let's jump into threatened fauna. For this example, we have a harvesting operation for a pine plantation in the Lyell area, in the northeast of the state. We have used the centroid of the planning area to generate a BVD report. Looking at the report for this area, you can see that we have quite a few records of threatened fauna, including the Mount Arthur burrowing crayfish, or Ingaeus oromacana. This is the species we will run through now. Like the previous example, we agree to the terms of use, then select forestry activity, as that includes plantation forestry, and again we fill out our details. Here we are at the list of fauna species. Unlike threatened plants, threatened fauna species are listed by common name and scientific name. Once again, we can use the search bar to navigate to the species like this, using either common name or scientific name. Alternatively, we can scroll to the species, with the fauna listed alphabetically by common name. So then we select our species and click Continue. The first question we come to is, which range are you in for this species? To answer this question, we need to go back to the BVD report and see what range our plantation coop is in for the Mount Arthur burrowing crayfish. This is listed here in the range class column, and as you can see, it is known range. So we select the option Core or Known, or presence is assumed, and click on Continue. The next question for this species is, does the proposed operation area, or area within 100 metres, contain potential habitat? This is where the habitat description from the BVD report is important. The habitat description says that this species likes poorly drained areas. Our coop contains streams and a boggy section, so it matches the description of potential habitat. The answer to this question is therefore yes. Now click Continue. We then come to the question, what is your proposed operation type? In this example, we describe the scenario as the harvesting of a pine plantation, which is a form of plantation management. So for our operation type, we select Plantation Management and click Continue. Here we have reached our recommendation, which is recommendation 4 for threatened burrowing crayfish. On this screen you can see the pathway we took to get to the recommendation, which was within core or known range, potential habitat present, plantation management. Like the threatened plant example, the recommendation starts with an objective, includes practical management recommendations, and concludes with a caveat. If you look a bit closer at the management advice in the recommendation, you can see it's divided into two different sections, one for the planning phase and one for the management of streams. The planning advice includes things like making sure the plan is in accordance with the plantation management sections of the Forest Practices Code, which include careful stream management, ensuring adjacent areas are not harvested in a short space of time, or coop dispersal, and asking planners to map streams, boggy areas and any crayfish burrows that may be present. The Class 1 to 4 stream management advice in this recommendation includes things like excluding machinery from streams and streamside reserves to reduce the impact of machinery on the crayfish living in the soil beside the streams. The recommendation also advises planners to retain any native vegetation on the streams to maintain the crayfish's preferred microclimate and avoid the use of any residual chemicals near the streams. At the end of the recommendation are the guidelines for plantation operations on Class 4 streams with high fauna values. As this area has records of a threatened stream-dwelling species, it has high fauna value. These guidelines provide practical advice for the cultivation stage of the operation, which varies depending on your slope. Our operation is on a relatively flat area with a slope of less than 11 degrees, so we follow the advice for flat land. In this case, it recommends that no cultivation should occur within 10 metres of Class 1, 2 or 3 streams, or within 5 metres of a Class 4 stream, but spot cultivation can occur next to Class 4 streams within the 5 to 10 metre zone. Scrolling down, we come to the same caveat as the flora example, and the automatically generated audit details appear, with your name and coop identifier. Remember to retain these details to demonstrate that you used the right recommendation in the advisor for the time at which you were planning.
Once you have a recommendation for your species, the next step is to use it to develop management prescriptions appropriate to the operation and incorporate them into the FPP. It is the planner's responsibility to ensure that a certified FPP includes all relevant actions required for threatened species. This may require multiple recommendations to be considered, for example if roading and harvesting in the one area. The prescription in the FPP should be worded so that the action is clear to those who are responsible for implementing the FPP on the ground, including contractors or supervisors. Transferring all the wording from the advisor recommendation word for word into an FPP is often not appropriate, and you'll likely need to select or modify the wording of the recommendation to suit the context of your planning area. Rephrasing of the recommendation is acceptable, provided that the management objective is still met. We will take you through an example using the Mount Arthur burrowing crayfish from the previous section. In this situation, the advisor recommendation includes instructions on buffering of all stream classes. In our imaginary coop, we only have Class 3 and 4 streams present, so don't need to include the stream buffer sizes for Class 1 and 2 streams from the Plantation Establishment section of the Forest Practices Code. We are also operating only on flat land, so do not need all the guidelines for steep land cultivation, including all the extra unnecessary recommendations as FPP prescriptions clogs up an FPP document and makes it less clear for the contractors carrying out the instructions. The key take-home message from this is to not copy and paste the recommendation word for word, but to instead reword it to suit the context of your FPP. You can contact the FPA for further advice if the recommendations in the advisor can't be implemented for some reason, or if a variation is made to the FPP that affects threatened species and the change is not covered by the FPP prescriptions or updated advisor recommendations, or if they cannot be applied. Or if more threatened species values are identified in the FPP area after completing the biodiversity evaluation. For example, if you find more crayfish burrows or discover a threatened plant species in your area.